Emily and I had been married for 10 years. On the outside, our life was perfect. 2 beautiful kids, a cozy suburban home, and a marriage that looked like it could weather anything. People would see us at neighborhood barbecues or school events and talk about how lucky we were to have each other. I believed it too once. But 10 years is a long time, and sometimes cracks form in places you'd never expect. It started a few months ago. Emily became distant, not cold exactly, but different. She took up going to the gym after work, saying she wanted to get in shape. At first I was supportive. Who wouldn't want their spouse to feel good about themselves? But then the gym sessions got longer. What started as an hour or two stretched into 3 or 4, and sometimes she wouldn't get home until after the kids were asleep. She had excuses: extra yoga classes, late runs, grabbing a protein shake with her trainer. Her trainer, Josh, was a name I heard more and more frequently. I tried not to overthink it. It wasn't like her to be secretive, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. But then little things started piling up. She started taking her phone with her everywhere: bathroom, kitchen, even to bed. She smiled more when she looked at her messages than when she looked at me. I'd ask how her workout went, and she'd light up talking about how Josh pushed her harder or helped her try new routines. There was something in her voice, the way she said his name, that made my stomach twist. The real gut punch came one evening when she canceled our plans for a rare date night. Josh invited me to this group hike, she explained with a half smile, as if it was no big deal. It'll be great for endurance training. She kissed me on the cheek and left without a second thought. I sat at the table for a while, staring at the half-burned candle I'd lit for our dinner, wondering if I was crazy or if something was really going on. My doubts started eating at me. I wanted to believe her, but every late-night text, every hushed phone call in the other room, added another brick to the wall between us. Then one night, as I was tucking our daughter into bed, she asked, "Daddy, why isn't Mommy home yet? Did she forget dinner again?" My chest tightened. Emily was always the one who insisted on family dinners, yet lately she was the first to miss them. I needed answers, so I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. The next day, I bought a small hidden camera and installed it in her car. It wasn't an easy decision. Spying on my wife felt wrong, but I justified it as a necessary evil. If I was wrong, no harm done. If I was right, well, I wasn't ready to think about that. For 2 days I didn't look at the footage. I'd see her come home, smiling faintly like everything was fine, and I'd feel a wave of guilt for doubting her. But on the 3rd night, curiosity got the better of me. After she left for another late workout, I sat down and pressed play. What I saw shattered me. The first clip was harmless enough, her pulling into the gym parking lot. But then Josh appeared, sliding into the passenger seat of her car. They laughed and talked for a bit, and then they kissed. Not just a peck on the cheek, but a full-on, passionate kiss. My hands clenched the edge of the laptop so hard I thought it might snap. The footage continued, showing them driving to a nearby motel. They didn't come back out for over an hour. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with questions and accusations. How long had this been going on? How could she betray me like this? I wanted to confront her, to scream and demand answers, but I held back. A confrontation would only let her control the narrative. No, if Emily and Josh wanted to play this game, I'd make sure the rules were on my terms. The next morning, I went through the motions like nothing was wrong. I kissed her goodbye, dropped the kids off at school, and went to work. But behind the calm facade, I was planning my next move. First, I met with a lawyer. I learned about divorce proceedings, asset division, and custody laws. I quietly moved half of our shared savings into a private account, just in case things turned ugly. Then, I began documenting everything. Screenshots of the footage, copies of her messages that I managed to glimpse when she wasn't looking, even the receipts for her late-night gym sessions. But I didn't stop there. I decided to play the long game, one that would leave no room for doubt about her betrayal. Our 10th wedding anniversary was coming up, and I suggested we throw a party. "It's been 10 years, I told her with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "We should celebrate." She seemed surprised but agreed, even offering to help with the guest list. Little did she know I had my own additions to make: friends, family, co-workers, and Josh. As the party drew closer, I put the finishing touches on my plan. I created a slideshow to commemorate our decade together. The first few slides were filled with happy memories: our wedding, the birth of our kids, family vacations. But toward the end, the tone would shift. That's when I'd reveal the footage from the hidden camera, showing Emily and Josh for what they really were. I wanted everyone to see the truth, to feel the betrayal as deeply as I did. In the weeks leading up to the party, Emily seemed almost happier. Maybe she thought I'd stopped noticing the late nights or the way she smiled at her phone. She even started suggesting date nights again, as if trying to reignite something that had already burned out. I played along, keeping up the charade, waiting for the moment when her perfect world would come crashing down. The night before the party, she came home late again. She kissed me on the cheek, mumbled something about a long workout, and climbed into bed. I sat in the living room for hours, staring at the slideshow on my laptop. Our wedding photo stared back at me, a reminder of what we used to be. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I going too far? Was this revenge or justice? By the time the sun rose, I had my answer. It was justice. She had broken our vows, humiliated me, and betrayed our family. She deserved whatever came next. That morning, the house buzzed with activity. Decorations were up, the caterers arrived, and the slideshow was cued on the TV. Emily flitted around, greeting guests with a radiant smile, completely unaware of what I had planned. I stayed in the background, watching and waiting as the minutes ticked closer to the moment I'd been preparing for. By the end of the night, everything would change. For her, for me, for everyone. The house was packed by the time the party hit its stride. Guests mingled in every corner, friends laughing over glasses of wine, family catching up on the patio, kids chasing each other through the yard. It was the kind of warm, lively scene that made people think we were the perfect couple. Emily shone in the center of it all, her laughter ringing out as she greeted old friends and introduced herself to newer ones. For a moment I watched her. The way she moved so effortlessly through the crowd, you'd think nothing in her life was out of place. She wore a sleek emerald green dress that hugged her figure in a way that would make any husband proud. If only I didn't know the truth. Josh was there too, blending into the background with a drink in his hand. He wore the same confident smirk he probably had whenever they were alone together. I clenched my jaw, reminding myself to stay calm. Not yet. When everyone had eaten, laughed, and settled into a comfortable rhythm, I clinked a glass to get their attention. The room fell quiet as all eyes turned toward me. Emily stood a few feet away, smiling expectantly, no doubt waiting for me to gush about her in front of our loved ones. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate 10 wonderful years of marriage." My eyes swept the room, catching the smiles and nods of approval. Emily looked radiant, her smile growing wider as she reached out to squeeze my hand. "It's not every day you get to reflect on a decade of love, family, and partnership," I continued. "So, I thought it'd be fitting to share a little something I put together, a trip down memory lane." Applause broke out as I picked up the remote and turned toward the TV mounted on the wall. The first slide appeared, a photo from our wedding day. Emily in her white gown, me in my tux, both of us glowing with the promise of a lifetime together. A soft awe rippled through the crowd. I heard Emily's mom whisper something about how beautiful she looked. The slideshow moved on, chronicling the milestones of our life together. The birth of our kids, family vacations, anniversaries past, all the moments that told the story of a happy marriage. People laughed and clapped at the funny photos, and I saw Emily tear up during the more sentimental ones. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, whispering, "This is perfect. Thank you." If only she knew. The final photo faded to black, and for a moment the screen remained dark. I could feel the anticipation in the room, people waiting for the big finish. Then the footage began to play. The room went silent. At first it was subtle. The camera showed Emily's car in a dimly lit parking lot, parked next to another vehicle. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Then the passenger door opened and Josh stepped in. Gasps erupted as the video continued, showing their laughter, their touch, and finally their kiss. Emily's face went pale. Her hand shot up to her mouth as if to stifle a scream. Beside her, Josh froze, his smirk evaporating in an instant. "What the hell is this?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't answer. The footage spoke for itself. The camera captured their movements clearly, too clearly to deny. Josh leaning closer, Emily laughing as she pushed his shoulder playfully, then pulling him back for another kiss. The gasps turned to murmurs and I could hear Emily's mother muttering, "Oh my God." Emily lunged toward me, trying to grab the remote. "Turn it off," she hissed, her face twisted in panic. I stepped back, holding it out of her reach. "Why, Emily?" My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "Why don't we let everyone see the truth? Isn't that what this is all about?" Her eyes darted around the room, desperate to find an ally. But the guests were frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Josh looked like he wanted to melt into the floor, his drink forgotten on the table. "Mike, please," Emily begged, her voice breaking. "Let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Is that what you were thinking when you snuck around behind my back? When you lied to me and our kids?" Did you even think about them? At the mention of our children, Emily flinched. I could see the weight of what she'd done crashing down on her, but it was too late for remorse. This wasn't just about me. She'd betrayed all of us. I think we've seen enough, someone mumbled, trying to defuse the tension. But I wasn't done. No, I'm not done, I snapped, cutting through the murmurs. Emily wanted to play games with my trust, with our family. Now she gets to see what it feels like to lose everything. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for me, but I stepped away. Josh, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke up. This isn't what it looks like, he stammered. The room erupted in angry whispers and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Really, Josh? That's the best you've got? I turned to him, my voice dripping with contempt. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is. Betrayal? Emily's father stood then, his face red with fury. Emily, is this true? He demanded, his voice shaking. She couldn't meet his gaze. That was all the answer he needed. He turned to me, his expression crumbling. I'm so sorry, Mike. It's not your fault, I said quietly. It's hers. By now the party was in shambles. Guests were leaving in uncomfortable clusters, avoiding eye contact as they made their way to the door. Josh tried to slip out unnoticed, but Emily's brother blocked his path. You're not going anywhere, you piece of garbage, he growled, shoving him backward. I didn't care what happened to Josh at that point. My focus was on Emily, who was crumpled on the floor, sobbing. For a moment I felt a pang of something, sympathy maybe? But then I thought about the nights I spent wondering where she was, the lies, the betrayal, the destruction of everything I thought we had. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there. Upstairs, I locked myself in the bedroom, away from the chaos below. I could hear muffled voices, arguments, accusations, apologies, but I didn't care. I'd done what I set out to do. Emily's mask was gone, and the perfect family image we'd built was shattered. It was time to start over on my terms this time. The morning after the party, the house felt like a graveyard. It wasn't just the mess left behind, half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, and decorations sagging in defeat, but the silence, thick and heavy, pressing down on everything. I'd slept in the guest room, leaving Emily to whatever corner of the house she decided to curl up in. When I finally came downstairs, I found her in the dining room. She was slumped on the floor, still wearing that damned emerald dress, her mascara smudged across her cheeks like battle scars. Her head jerked up when she heard my footsteps. For a second, she looked like she didn't recognize me, her bloodshot eyes darting around the room as if trying to piece together what had happened. Then reality hit. Mike, she croaked, her voice raw, can we talk? I stopped at the doorway, leaning against the frame. Talk? My tone was as flat as I could make it, but my insides churned with a bitter mix of anger and disgust. You mean like how you talked to Josh in the backseat of your car? Or maybe in those motel rooms? She flinched as if I'd struck her, and her hands shot up to cover her face. She mumbled something into her palms that I couldn't make out. I stepped closer. What was that? I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. Mike, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I laughed, a short, sharp bark that made her flinch again. You never wanted it to happen? I echoed, letting the words hang in the air. Right. Because people just accidentally cheat on their spouses. Is that how it works? Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to speak. I don't know why, I was stupid, selfish. I didn't think it would go this far. Go this far? I snapped. Emily, you had an affair. You lied to me, to the kids, to everyone. How far did you think it would go? She opened her mouth to answer but then closed it again, her eyes dropping to the floor. I could see the wheels turning in her head, searching for the right words to undo the damage, but there weren't any. There never could be. Save it, I said, cutting her off before she could start. I've already talked to a lawyer. The divorce papers are being drafted, and I've moved half of our savings into a separate account. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. Mike, no, please. Don't do this. Don't give up on us. Us. I spat the word like it was poison. There is no us, Emily. There hasn't been for months, not since you decided that whatever you had with Josh was worth throwing this family away. She broke then, collapsing back to the floor in a heap of sobs. It might have been pitiful if I had anything left in me to pity her. Instead, I turned and walked out, grabbing my car keys on the way. I needed air, space, something to clear the suffocating weight pressing down on me. I drove aimlessly for hours, letting the road unwind in front of me. At one point, I ended up at the lake where we used to take the kids. I parked by the water, staring out at the calm surface. It felt like a cruel joke, How something so still and serene could exist while my life was falling apart. I thought about the slideshow, the look on Emily's face when the footage played, the way Josh tried to slink out of the party like a coward. It had felt satisfying in the moment, but now it just left a hollow ache in my chest. At some point my phone buzzed. Messages poured in, family, friends, even Emily, all wanting answers. I ignored them all except for one, my lawyer. "Everything's in motion," he said when I called. "You're in a strong position, but be ready. She might push back." "Let her," I said. "I've already lost everything that matters." When I finally returned home, it was well past dark. The house was quiet again, and I found the kids playing quietly in the living room. Their faces lit up when they saw me, a mix of relief and worry. "Daddy?" Lily cried, running to hug me. "Are you okay?" I knelt down, pulling her into my arms. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "How about you?" She nodded, but her little face was clouded with concern. "Mommy's been crying a lot," she said softly. "Did you have a fight?" My heart twisted. "Yeah, baby. We had a fight. But don't worry, I'll always be here for you no matter what." Ben, my oldest, approached more cautiously. He was 10, old enough to sense that something wasn't right. "Dad," he said, his voice quiet, "is it true? What people are saying about Mom?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said carefully. "Big ones. But what matters is that I love you and your sister, and I'll always take care of you. That will never change." He frowned but didn't push for more. Instead, he hugged me too, and for a moment, the three of us just held on to each other like we were the only solid things in a crumbling world. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat in the kitchen nursing a glass of whiskey. The divorce papers were spread out in front of me, alongside the custody forms and bank statements. It was a lot to take in, but for the first time in months I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the start of something new. The next morning I woke up early and made the kids breakfast. We laughed over pancakes and syrup, pretending for a little while that everything was normal. After dropping them off at school, I drove to a dealership. I'd been eyeing a yacht for years, a symbol of freedom, of escape. That day I put down a deposit and christened it with a name that felt fitting. Freedom. I didn't know where I'd take it or when. All I knew was that I was done being stuck in the wreckage of the life Emily had destroyed. It was time to rebuild one step at a time. The house felt like a battlefield after the party, the air thick with tension and silence. The decorations still hung limply, mocking reminders of what the night had been meant to celebrate. Empty glasses and abandoned plates littered the space, but I didn't care about cleaning up. My focus was on figuring out how to keep going, how to steer this sinking ship to safety for the sake of the kids, if not myself. Emily spent most of her time holed up in the guest room. I wasn't sure if it was shame or an avoidance tactic, but I didn't care enough to ask. I was sleeping in our bedroom, though it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt hollow, like a museum exhibit of a life that used to exist, one I wasn't welcome in anymore. We didn't speak except for the bare minimum required to manage the kids. When I wasn't taking them to school, helping with homework, or trying to keep their spirits up, I was on the phone with my lawyer or sitting in my car, staring at nothing, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. One morning, as I stood at the kitchen counter sipping coffee, Emily shuffled in. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her hair tangled and her face pale. She hesitated in the doorway, then finally spoke, her voice weak. "Mike, can we talk?" I didn't turn to face her. "What's there to talk about, Emily?" She stepped closer, wringing her hands like a child caught stealing. "I want to explain. I want to fix this." "Explain what?" I set the mug down with more force than necessary. "That you decided screwing Josh was worth throwing away 10 years of marriage? That you lied to me, to the kids? Or maybe that you thought I'd never find out?" Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. I was lost. I didn't feel like myself anymore. And Josh, he made me feel seen." I spun around to face her, my anger bubbling over. "Seen?" I hissed. "Are you kidding me? I've been here every damn day, Emily. I've seen you, supported you, loved you. But apparently that wasn't enough." "It's not that simple," she pleaded. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? What did you think was going to happen when you started sneaking around with him? Did you think about what this would do to me? To the kids?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at me, then down at the floor, her shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's too late for sorry," I said, my voice cold. "I filed for divorce. The papers are on the way, and I've already moved half of our savings into a separate account. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. Mike, please don't do this. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. There's no fixing this, I said firmly. You made your choice, Emily. Now you have to live with it. Her tears fell freely now, and she looked so broken, so small. Once I might have felt sorry for her, might have wanted to comfort her, but not anymore. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the wreckage she'd created. A few days later, Josh texted me. His message was short, almost casual. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my anger simmering. I finally replied, we have nothing to talk about. Stay away from me and my family. His response came almost immediately. Please, Mike, let me explain. Explain? The sheer audacity of it made me laugh bitterly. But when I saw him standing outside my house later that evening, I knew I couldn't ignore him any longer. I stepped onto the porch, my fists clenched at my sides. What the hell are you doing here? I demanded. Josh held up his hands in what I guessed was supposed to be a calming gesture. I just want to apologize, he said. I never meant for things to get out of hand. Out of hand? I repeated, my voice rising. You slept with my wife, Josh. You didn't just cross a line. You obliterated it. He flinched, but he didn't leave. I know I messed up. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said, taking a step closer. You think you can just show up here, say you're sorry, and everything will be fine? That's not how this works. I know, he said, his voice quieter now. But I needed to say it. For a moment, I considered hitting him, letting him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But then I thought about my kids, asleep upstairs, and I knew it wasn't worth it. Get out, I said, my voice deadly calm. If I ever see you near me or my family again, I won't be this polite. He hesitated but finally nodded and walked away. I stood there watching him until he disappeared into the night. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to take shape again. Emily signed the divorce papers without a fight, though I couldn't tell if it was out of guilt or exhaustion. The lawyer assured me everything was on track. Custody arrangements, financial splits, all of it. It felt clinical, mechanical, but it was progress. I poured my energy into the kids, trying to give them some sense of normalcy. We went on hikes, built pillow forts, and made pancakes every Sunday. I took Ben to a science museum for a school project and taught Lily how to ride her bike without training wheels. Those moments became my lifeline, the only thing keeping me grounded. One Saturday, I took them to the marina to see the yacht I'd bought. A bold move, maybe, but one I felt I needed. The name Freedom gleamed on its side in fresh paint. The kids' faces lit up when they saw it, their excitement contagious. Are we going on an adventure? Lily asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Yeah, I said, smiling for what felt like the first time in ages. We're going on an adventure. As we set sail that day, the weight I'd been carrying began to lift. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It was still there, but it felt smaller somehow, like the distance from the shore was giving me room to breathe. For the first time in months, I felt like I could see a future beyond the wreckage. Freedom, I thought. It was more than the name of the boat. It was the life I was finally beginning to claim as my own. The weeks after the yacht trip passed like a blur, each day feeling like I was clawing my way out of quicksand. The kids adjusted better than I expected, their resilience a testament to how much they needed stability. Emily, however, lingered like a ghost in the house. Despite everything, she hadn't moved out yet. She'd given me space, signed the papers, and kept her distance, but her presence weighed on the atmosphere. Every corner of the house held a memory of what we used to be, and every interaction with her was a reminder of how much had changed. I knew it couldn't go on like this. I couldn't fully move forward while living under the same roof as her. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I knocked on the door of the guest room. Emily's voice called softly from inside. Come in. She was sitting on the bed, a pile of clothes half folded beside her. She looked up at me, her face pale and drawn, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. What is it, Mike? She asked. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. We need to talk about you moving out. She blinked, her expression unreadable. I figured this was coming, she said after a pause. But where am I supposed to go? You have family, I said. Your parents would take you in. Or you can stay with a friend, find a rental, whatever you decide, but this isn't working. Not for me and definitely not for the kids. Her jaw tightened and she looked away. So that's it? You're just done with me? Emily, you cheated on me, I said, my voice sharp. You destroyed our marriage. What did you expect? That I'd let you stay here indefinitely while I pretended everything was fine? Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment I saw the woman I married, The one who used to laugh with me over coffee, who used to tell me everything. I know I messed up, she said quietly. I don't know how to move on. You should have thought about that before, I said coldly. This is your mess, Emily. You have to figure out how to clean it up. The next morning she told the kids she'd be leaving. We sat together in the living room, the tension thick enough to choke on. Lily clung to Emily's side, tears streaming down her cheeks. Why do you have to go, Mommy? She asked, her voice trembling. Did we do something wrong? Emily hugged her tightly, her own tears falling freely. No, baby, she whispered. This isn't your fault. Mommy just needs some time to figure things out. Ben sat on the other side of the couch, his face a mask of quiet anger. He didn't say much, but I could see the questions swirling in his eyes. He was old enough to understand that this wasn't just about figuring things out. He knew there was more to the story, even if he didn't have all the details. After they went to bed, Emily and I packed up her things. She didn't have much to take, just clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items. The rest she said she'd deal with later. I helped her load everything into the trunk of her car, the silence between us heavy and awkward. As she climbed into the driver's seat, she hesitated, her hand on the door. Mike, she said softly, I know you probably don't believe me, but I am sorry. For everything. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to yell at her, to tell her how much pain she'd caused, but I was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of hurting, tired of her. Goodbye, Emily, I said finally, stepping back from the car. She nodded, tears spilling over again, and then she drove away. I watched her taillights fade into the distance, a strange mix of relief and sadness settling over me. It felt like the end of a chapter, one that had dragged on far too long. A new routine. In the weeks that followed, the house felt emptier, but also lighter. Without Emily's presence, the tension lifted and the kids seemed to relax. I threw myself into creating a new routine for us. Making breakfast every morning, helping with homework in the evenings, and planning little weekend adventures to keep their minds off the changes. One Saturday we went back to the marina to take Freedom out for another trip. The kids were giddy with excitement as we sailed into the open water, the wind tugging at their hair. Ben even took the wheel for a while, his serious expression making me laugh. You're a natural, Captain, I told him, ruffling his hair. Lily, meanwhile, sat at the bow, her legs swinging over the edge as she gazed out at the horizon. Daddy, she said after a while, do you think Mommy will ever come back? Her question caught me off guard and I hesitated before answering. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. But no matter what happens, you and Ben will always have me. Okay? She nodded, her little face thoughtful. I like it when it's just us, she said after a moment. It feels happy. Her words stayed with me long after we returned home. She was right. In the absence of lies and betrayal, there was room for happiness again. It was a fragile thing, but it was there and I was determined to hold on to it. A glimpse of closure. About a month after Emily left, I got a letter in the mail. It was from her, written in shaky handwriting on plain stationery. I opened it cautiously, half expecting another apology or plea to come back. Instead, it was a surprisingly raw, heartfelt attempt at closure. She wrote about her guilt, her regret, and her hope that one day I could forgive her, not for her sake but for mine. I know I don't deserve it, she wrote, but I hope you can find peace. I hope you can be happy again. I folded the letter and set it aside, unsure of how to feel. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give her yet, maybe not ever. But I realized that I didn't need her apology to move forward. I was already doing it, one day at a time. That weekend, I took the kids to a new hiking trail, one we'd never explored before. As we climbed higher, the view opened up, a sweeping panorama of hills and valleys stretching into the distance. It felt like a metaphor for our lives, challenging but full of possibility. At the top, Ben turned to me, his face flushed with excitement. This is awesome, Dad, he said, grinning. It is, I agreed, pulling them both into a hug. It really is. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were going to be okay. Life had begun to settle into something resembling normalcy after Emily left. Mornings were chaotic but manageable, getting the kids ready for school, packing lunches, and arguing with Ben over why cereal didn't count as a complete breakfast. Lily insisted on wearing her sneakers the wrong way around just to make me laugh, and I'd fix them while she giggled, telling me I was the best dad ever. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I stood at the altar with Emily 10 years ago, but it was ours now, and I was determined to make it work. The house felt lighter without Emily's presence. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, no wondering whether her smile hid another lie. But the quiet nights had their own weight, especially after the kids were asleep and the distractions were gone. I'd sit in the living room with the TV on, not really watching, and let my mind drift to places I didn't want to go. Sometimes I wondered what she was doing, if she missed us, if she was still seeing Josh. I hated that I cared, but letting go of 10 years wasn't easy. My outlet became work around the house. I fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, cleaned out the garage, and repainted the living room a warm shade of blue. Each completed task felt like a small victory, a tangible reminder that I was still capable of building something, even as parts of my life lay in ruins. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw her again. I dropped the kids off at school and decided to spend the day at the marina, working on Freedom. There was a small leak in one of the storage compartments that I'd been meaning to patch up. The repetitive work was comforting, and I lost myself in it, the sound of water lapping against the hull filling the silence in my head. I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until someone cleared their throat. Turning around, I froze when I saw Emily standing on the dock. She looked different, not in a drastic way but enough that I noticed. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore no makeup, just a simple hoodie and jeans. She looked smaller somehow. Her eyes met mine briefly before dropping to the ground. "Mike," she said softly, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I had to come." I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. "What are you doing here, Emily?" My voice was neutral, but inside I could feel the old anger stirring. She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I wanted to talk. To apologize. In person." "You already apologized," I said flatly, tossing the rag onto the deck. "What more is there to say?" She took a shaky breath and stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "I know I hurt you, Mike. I know I ruined everything. I've spent the last month trying to figure out how to fix it, but there's no fixing this, is there?" "No, Emily," I said, my voice sharp. "There isn't." Her face crumpled, but she didn't look away. "I just wanted you to know. I'm trying to be better. For the kids. For myself. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to say it." I crossed my arms, studying her. There was something different about her, a sincerity that hadn't been there before. But it didn't change anything. "The kids are fine," I said. "They're adjusting. And so am I. That's all you need to know." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Do they hate me?" I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "They don't hate you, Emily. They're confused, hurt. But they love you. That's not going to change." Tears slid down her cheeks and she wiped them away quickly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For taking care of them. For being the dad they deserve." I wanted to yell, to tell her how much she'd broken me, how hard it had been to pick up the pieces. But standing there, looking at the woman I once loved reduced to this fragile version of herself, I didn't have the energy. "You should go," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "I need to finish up here." She hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. "Goodbye, Mike," she said softly before turning and walking away. I stood there for a long time after she was gone, staring out at the water. Part of me felt lighter, like something had shifted, but another part felt heavier than ever. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give her yet, maybe not ever. But for the first time, I realized I didn't need to carry the weight of her actions anymore. It was her burden to bear, not mine. That weekend I took the kids back out on Freedom. It had become our little escape, a way to leave the chaos of the world behind for a while. Ben was getting better at steering and Lily loved sitting at the bow, her arms spread wide like she was flying. Watching them laugh and shout as the wind whipped through their hair, I felt a strange sense of peace. "Are we going far, Dad?" Lily called, her voice full of excitement. "As far as we want," I said, smiling. Ben turned from the wheel, grinning. "You think we'll see dolphins this time?" "Maybe," I said. "Keep your eyes open." As we sailed into the open water, the sun warm on my face, I realized something. I didn't need Emily's forgiveness, her approval, or her guilt to move forward. I had everything I needed right here: my kids, my freedom, and the open horizon. The rest would come in time. The weeks blurred into months and life gradually settled into a new routine. It wasn't perfect. There were still sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and the occasional pang of anger when I thought about everything Emily had done. But the days had started to feel manageable again. There was a rhythm to it. Morning chaos with the kids, work, evening routines, and little moments of laughter that reminded me there was still joy to be found, even in the aftermath of something so devastating. The kids were doing better than I'd expected. Lily had returned to her bubbly self, bouncing through the house like nothing could hold her down. Ben, on the other hand, was more reserved. He smiled less, spoke less, and often retreated into his room to read or play video games. I knew he was still processing everything even if he didn't say it outright. One evening, as I helped him with his science homework at the kitchen table, he surprised me with a question I wasn't ready for. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant, "do you still love Mom?" I froze for a moment, his words hanging in the air between us. Setting down the paper I'd been holding, I looked at him carefully. "That's a big question, Ben," I said softly. "What makes you ask that?" He shrugged, staring at his pencil as he twirled it between his fingers. "I don't know. I've been thinking about it. You guys used to laugh all the time. And now, you don't even talk." The sadness in his voice hit me hard, and I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Ben, I'll always care about your mom," I said honestly. "She gave me you and Lily, and for that I'll always be grateful. But sometimes when people hurt each other, it makes things really hard. Love can change." He looked up at me, his brow furrowed. "But do you still love her?" I sighed, trying to find the right words. "I think I'll always love the person she was, the woman I married. But sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they love. And when that happens, it can be hard to feel the same way." Ben nodded slowly, though I could tell he wasn't entirely satisfied with my answer. "Do you think she still loves us?" That was an easier question. "Of course she does," I said firmly. "Your mom loves you and Lily more than anything. She might not always show it the way you expect, but that doesn't mean it's not true." He seemed to relax at that, and after a moment he went back to his homework. But his question stayed with me long after he'd gone to bed. Did I still love Emily? The answer wasn't as simple as I'd made it seem. A part of me would probably always love the version of her I'd fallen in love with, the woman who laughed at my bad jokes and stayed up late dreaming about our future. But the person she'd become? The one who lied, who betrayed me, who tore our family apart. That version of Emily was a stranger to me, and I didn't know if I'd ever feel love for her again. One crisp Saturday morning, I took the kids to the local farmer's market. The air was cool and the sun was bright, casting everything in a golden glow. The market was buzzing with energy, vendors calling out their specials, the smell of fresh bread and coffee wafting through the air, and families wandering between the stalls. Lily was in her element, dragging me from one stand to the next to show me jars of honey, handmade jewelry, and bouquets of wildflowers. Ben trailed behind us, hands in his pockets, looking mildly bored but content to follow along. At one point, Lily pulled me toward a stall selling homemade candles, insisting I smell every single one. "This one smells like cookies," she exclaimed, holding up a jar labeled Brown Sugar Dreams. "You're right, it does," I said, smiling as I took a whiff. "Should we get it for the house?" She nodded enthusiastically, and as I handed the vendor a $10 bill, I heard a voice behind me. "Mike." I turned, and for a moment my heart stopped. Standing there, holding a basket of fresh produce, was a woman I hadn't seen in years, Rachel. Rachel and I had gone to college together. We'd been close back then, the kind of friends who could talk for hours about anything and everything. There was a time when I'd thought about asking her out, but life had pulled us in different directions. The last time I'd seen her was at my wedding, where she'd congratulated me with a warm smile and then disappeared back into her world. "Rachel," I said, surprised but genuinely happy to see her. "Wow, it's been, what, 10 years? "More like 11, she said with a laugh. "I almost didn't recognize you. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" I asked, grinning. She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Good thing. You look good." Before I could respond, Lily tugged on my arm. "Daddy, who's that?" I glanced down at her and then back at Rachel. "This is an old friend of mine," I explained. "Rachel, meet my daughter, Lily. And that over there is my son, Ben." Rachel's smile widened as she crouched to Lily's level. "Nice to meet you, Lily," she said warmly. "I love your jacket." "Thanks," Lily said proudly. "It has unicorns." Rachel laughed, standing back up. "She's adorable." "She knows it," I said, ruffling Lily's hair. For the next few minutes, Rachel and I caught up, exchanging quick summaries of the past decade. She was back in town to help her parents, who were getting older and needed some support. I told her about the kids, carefully avoiding any mention of Emily or the divorce. "Maybe we could catch up properly sometime," Rachel said as we parted ways. "It'd be nice to talk more." "Yeah," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "I'd like that." As we walked back to the car, Lily skipped ahead, humming a tune to herself. Ben glanced at me curiously. "Who was she?" he asked. "An old friend," I said simply. He nodded, thoughtful. "She seemed nice." "She is," I said, smiling to myself. "She really is." That night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself thinking about Rachel. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was hope. Hope that there might still be good things waiting for me, even after everything I'd lost. And for the first time in a long time, that hope felt like enough. As the months passed, the wounds Emily had left behind began to feel less like open gashes and more like faded scars. They were still there, reminders of a life I once believed was solid, but they didn't dominate every thought anymore. Time had a way of dulling the sharpest pain, and between my kids, my projects, and the occasional trip out on freedom, I found myself rediscovering a version of me I'd forgotten existed. Emily was still a presence in our lives, but a distant one. She called to talk to the kids a couple of times a week, and they saw her on alternating weekends. Our interactions were polite but brief, logistical exchanges about schedules and school projects. Every now and then, I'd catch her looking at me when she picked up the kids, like she was trying to find the right words to say something, but she never did. And I never asked. One day I came across her letter again, the one she'd written a few months ago. I hadn't thought about it much since the day I read it, but this time, something made me sit down and go through it again. Her words were raw and full of regret, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine pity for her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an understanding that she'd been just as lost in her own way as I'd been. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the drawer. Some things didn't need closure, just a quiet acceptance that they were over. One Saturday morning I found myself driving to the marina alone. Ben and Lily were spending the weekend with Emily, and the house felt too quiet without them. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn day that made the water sparkle like glass under the sun. I parked the car and walked down to Freedom, running my hand along the smooth surface of the hull as I boarded. I wasn't out on the water for more than 20 minutes before my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. "Hey," she said when I answered. "What are you up to?" "Just out on the boat," I said, adjusting the tiller. "Why? What's up?" She hesitated for a moment before replying. "I was thinking about what you said the other day. About how being on the water clears your head. I could use some of that right now." A smile tugged at my lips. "You're always welcome aboard," I said. "How soon can you be here?" She laughed, and the sound warmed something in me that I hadn't realized was still cold. "Give me an hour." By the time Rachel arrived, the marina was buzzing with activity, families and fishermen bustling about. She stepped onto the boat with a hesitant smile, dressed in jeans and a windbreaker that made her look like she'd been born for days like this. "This is nice," she said, glancing around as she settled into one of the seats. "I can see why you like it out here." "It's peaceful," I agreed, starting the engine. "Gives you space to think." We headed out toward open water, the sound of waves slapping against the boat filling the silence between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. Rachel had always been easy to talk to, even back in college. We caught up as we cruised, talking about everything from her parents' health to the books Ben and Lily were obsessed with. At one point, as we drifted under a wide stretch of blue sky, Rachel leaned back and closed her eyes. "You're lucky, you know," she said softly. "Lucky?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Not the word I'd used to describe the last year. She smiled faintly but didn't open her eyes. "I don't mean what happened with Emily. I mean this." She gestured vaguely to the boat, the horizon, the life I was slowly piecing back together. "You're building something new. That's rare. Most people just get stuck in the wreckage." Her words stayed with me long after we docked. For so long I'd felt like my life was defined by what I'd lost. But maybe she was right. Maybe I was starting to build something new, something better. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I saw more of each other. It started casually, grabbing coffee, meeting up at the farmer's market, and the occasional phone call that stretched into the early hours of the morning. She never pushed, never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. She just showed up, steady and warm, like an anchor in a storm. The kids liked her too. Lily loved her stories about growing up on a farm, and Ben, while cautious, seemed to respect the way she talked to him like he was an adult. Watching them interact, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. One evening, after Rachel had stayed for dinner, she lingered by the door as she was leaving. The kids had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. "Thanks for having me," she said, her hand on the doorknob. "Anytime," I said. And I meant it. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "Mike," she began, her voice soft, "I don't know what this is, or where it's going. But I like spending time with you. And I want you to know that I'm okay taking it slow. Whatever pace you need." I nodded, my chest tightening at the honesty in her words. "Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that." For a moment we just stood there, the unspoken words between us thick and heavy. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and tentative, but it felt right. When we pulled apart, she smiled, her cheeks flushed. "Good night, Mike." "Good night, Rachel." As I watched her walk to her car, a strange warmth spread through me. It wasn't the giddy rush of falling in love for the first time, but something quieter, steadier. The next morning, as I made breakfast for the kids, Lily looked up from her cereal with a mischievous grin. "Daddy," she said, "do you like Rachel?" I froze, the spatula halfway to the skillet. "What makes you ask that?" "You smiled a lot last night," she said, her eyes sparkling. "And Rachel smiled too." "Like this?" She scrunched up her face into an exaggerated grin, and Ben snorted into his orange juice. "Rachel's a good friend," I said carefully, flipping the pancake. Ben smirked. "A friend, huh?" I shot him a look, but I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "Eat your breakfast," I said, shaking my head. As they laughed and teased me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. My life wasn't perfect, it might never be, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it was mine. And that was enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.